Hey guys, here's a game between dashofchutmeg and PhilWoodlust. Dashofchutmeg is playing white, and PhilWoodlust is playing black. We begin with e4, e5. Pretty simple idea, opening up the diagonals, this diagonal rather, and also staking a claim to the center. Okay, white begins with the bishop's opening, bishop c4. And black responds with the Berlin defense. The idea is that the knight is developed toward the center of the board and also puts pressure on the e-pawn, which is a very important piece for white. So essentially, my next move is going to be, to add defense to that square. But instead I play the Ponziani Gambit, which is d4, and this basically gives two options to black to take. And the two options that are here are knight takes e4 or pawn takes d4. Pawn takes d4 has a continuation where white can recapture with the queen, but after knight c6, the queen probably has to come back to d1. This is a pretty solid position. White has an open diagonal here. White is eyeing down the f7 square, which is the weakest position on the board for white, since only the king defends it. And this position is actually favoring black by 0.8 pawns. So really nice opening for black if he were to get to this position. But what instead happened was bishop d6. And bishop d6 is a blunder, and the reason for the blunder is that after white takes on e5, you would think that the bishop would be able to simply take back. But the problem is that after white pushes the f pawn, which is usually not something you want to do in the opening, now the f pawn is now defended by that bishop because we have this pawn out of the way. The bishop is now defending that pawn. And obviously we can see that this pawn is going to be able to move on the next move. So after bishop moves to the only safe square that's available, we have a fork, and the pawn is attacking both the bishop and the knight. Okay, so that's the idea, and that's why the bishop d6 is a bad move. What it also does, in addition to the fork, is it traps this pawn from moving out. Okay, so in this position, this bishop wants to get to an open diagonal, and bringing the bishop down here means you'd have to move the pawn forward. It's just not going to happen very quickly, and of course in the opening, time is very important. So we have instead of making the best move, which is to simply take on e5, I develop my bishop, or I develop my knight, and my knight is now defending d4, it's attacking e5, it's defending e5, so the pawn can take on the very next move. So the best option here for black in this situation would be to move his knight. And in the opening, we really want our moves to be twofold. We want them to have more than one purpose, and in this case, it does. It puts pressure on the, it puts pressure on the d pawn. It defends e5. It also gets the knight out to a more active position than in the back rank. So it essentially prevents this pawn from forking the two pieces on the 6th rank. But what instead we have is castling, kingside castling, which usually is a good move in the opening, but because of the threat of the fork, it's not a great move. So I then go ahead with the fork. My knight is defending it. Now my queen is opened up. Again, my bishop is eyeing down a very long diagonal. My white bishop is attacking the f7 square, which the rook and the king are defending, but down the road that could be helpful. And Phil makes another blunder in e8. And the idea here is that you're going to have some counterplay once I take back. And that's exactly what I do. I take the bishop, since I want to go up in material. I want to take that minor piece. And Phil then makes the best available move, which is to take with the rook. putting a tempo on my king by putting it in check. and also attacking the bishop, which would be a great idea if the bishop could not come back to e2 to remove check from the king. But because it is, I block with the bishop. Now c takes d6. This is again a fine move, but it then stacks up pawns on the d file, all but ensuring that this bishop is never really going to get into the game. It's going to take the movement of the b pawn to get the bishop to one of these two squares, and it's just going to take too long. So I then go ahead and remove the pin from the bishop by castling. Again, we want our moves in the opening to have multiple purposes. In the previous position, my bishop is pinned to the knight because of this attack. I didn't want that to continue, so I castled. My king is safer, and the pawn is removed from the bishop, and my rook is ready to get involved into the game. So simply by castling, I did 3 things to improve my position. After knight c6, which is a fine move, again, we're trying to develop and bring the knight into the game, defending these key squares. Then we have bishop d3, which is actually a poor move. It's an inaccurate move. There was a better move, which is knight c3, which also puts a tempo on the rook, forcing it to move backward. But I didn't play that. I played bishop d3, opening up this file for my rook to at some point come into the game. After rook e6, bringing it back to safety, I play knight c3. Again, simple developing move. d5 doesn't really accomplish much. The idea is that, you know, by moving this, you can then maybe move this pawn and try to get into the game. But this is a mistake. h6 is a much better move. The reason is that this square is very weak. This square is very weak for black. And after the next several moves, you know, white, according to the computer, is up 5 points by move 11. So this is kind of a lost position for black. I really just have to trade down. You know, a player who's just going for the win could take this bishop and trade it. And, you know, the rook recaptures, and then, you know, we can start gobbling up material and forcing black into an endgame that is already lost. So ultimately, you know, it was this move back in the beginning of the game. It is the third move of the game that's really the decisive move in the game. So again, the key concept here is that you don't want to block your pawns in, and you don't want to allow your bishop and your knight to be attacked by a defended pawn in the center of the board. It's a recipe for going down a material and having a really tough time battling back. Overall, you know, it was a good game by a novice player, especially trying to reclaim an advantage later in the game. But I'll make some more videos and show some more ways that we can, you know, avoid positions like this and hopefully have better games of chess. Thanks for the game, Phil, and hope you found this useful. I'll talk to you later. Bye.